All right, good morning, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know some more people will wander in a few minutes. I was just going to mention after the service this morning that these sessions are a great example of what small groups do at CUMC because of the Racial Reconciliation and Social Justice Committee, which is a small group of people. We are the ones who have created these the community outreach and educational opportunities to learn about how we can use the social principles of the United Methodist Church to enrich our community and strive towards these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion. But I want to go ahead and introduce our very special guest speaker, who must also be a jet setter as well, with covering 30 offices nationwide. But Jennifer Mencarini is the Director of Cultural Engagement at Fox Rothschild. And she leads the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the firm's 30 nationwide offices. She also serves on the board of the Association of Law Firm Diversity Professionals and co-chairs the National Association for Law Placement's Religious Inclusion Task Force, helping lawyers and law students thrive in a more diverse and inclusive profession. Jennifer brings years of hands-on experience creating inclusive workplaces and supporting religious accommodation. Again, she's going to show us how the United Methodist social principles can be a practical guide for building more just communities, both at work and in our daily lives. And at a time when, as we all know, DEI programs are being rolled back nationwide, affecting communities of color, people with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus individuals, and women, Jennifer will share concrete ways we can put our faith, values into practice to create opportunity and equity for everyone. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Jennifer Mencarini.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. That was a very fancy introduction. I'm not a very fancy person. So happy to share a little bit more about myself that's not just about my work experience. So a little bit about me. So I was raised United Methodist, and my church was called Arlington Forest United Methodist Church in Arlington, Virginia. It is no longer a United Methodist church, but that's what I grew up in. I sang in the choir. I was listening to Methodist hymns on the way here, singing the alto part. Also, I have been a little disillusioned with organized religion as a result of my work. And that's because we're going to talk a little bit about this today, that the church, as you know, has been not always a force for good in this area. And that's something that I really struggled with in my own faith journey. So I'm not a theologian. And my brother is actually a Baptist pastor, and he would be appalled if he knew I was talking about scripture because he has a very advanced graduate degree and knows Hebrew and Greek, and I'm just a regular person. But in any case, I'm a recovering attorney. I practiced, I was a litigator for almost 12 years, and I represented doctors and nurses who've been sued for malpractice primarily. I'm a wife, a stepmom, and a dog mom, and don't ever come between me and my books. I read a lot. My goal for this year is 60 books, and I've read 41, so I'm well on my way. And finally, I'm a Francophile. Je parle français couramment. I speak French fluently and love to go to France. I haven't been there in a long time, but I love to go. So just a little bit about me personally. So I just want to start first with a little bit of ground setting about the secular and modern definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity, think of it like a salad bowl, right? To make a salad, you can't just have lettuce or just have tomatoes. You have to have green lettuce, red tomatoes, orange carrots, croutons, dressing, the cheese of your choice. And without all those things, the salad doesn't work well. And people are the same. It's been proven over and over again. The more diverse a group or a team is, the more effectively it works together. And it's also just better for us as people to be around folks who don't look like us or who have different lived experiences. I also want to say what diversity is not. And that is, have any of you ever heard someone, a person, individual called a diverse person. Yeah, an individual person is not diverse. You have to say what they are. That's kind of code for they're different. And that also reinforces white supremacy because it assumes that someone who's diverse is not part of the main group, right? So there are lots of different words you can use: underrepresented, marginalized, or the identity that you're talking about. They're Black, they're a woman, they're disabled, they're LGBTQ, they're trans. That's much more effective when we use that kind of language instead of sort of coded words like they're a diverse candidate. It drives me nuts when I hear that. So that's what it's not. So inclusion, I'm going to skip to inclusion. It's when people in a space feel that they are welcomed, valued, respected, and included as their authentic selves, meaning they don't have to mask or show up as something that they're not. They can be real when they show up. So equity, I'm going to talk about that for a second. So I like this visual. So a lot of people confuse equality and equity. So when we look at this visual, equality is every single person got the same bike. But that bike doesn't work for everyone, right? So equity is really more what we're aiming for instead of equality, because when we have equity, then every person gets the bike that they need to be able to participate in the activity. So just a helpful visual to tell the difference between those things. So I also want to tell you, I am not here as a representative of the law firm where I work. And anything I say to you today I'm here as myself. Anything I say to you today should not be construed as legal advice. Since I'm a lawyer, I have to say these disclosures. Kent, you can say I said it when we go back to work tomorrow. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about sort of the law around discrimination. So I'm sure all of you know about the executive orders that the current administration has passed trying to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion in multiple spaces. Technically, the executive orders do not have the force of law. They only really can apply to the executive branch. So for example, they can apply to government agencies that are operated by the executive branch, and there's an argument that they can apply to people who receive federal funds from the government. The current administration is trying to force this on private employers, but you should know that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still what we call good law. It's still in place, and it still prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Sometimes people ask, well, what about disability? That's actually covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was created in 1990 and passed by Congress. And so it's really important to understand that these executive orders do not supersede Title VII and all of the many, many, many cases interpreting Title VII in the years since 1964. Interestingly, the executive orders preserved protection for veterans and those who are disabled, specifically referencing blind people, but disability is one of the things that's still included. And so one of the things that a lot of lawyers recommend now post-executive order is that you assess programs to make sure they're not providing specific employment opportunities to any one group or multiple groups of people. And Title VII applies to employers with more than 15 employees. It's enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which has been instructed by the current administration to deprioritize claims of disparate impact. What's disparate impact? It's when an employer's policy or practice appears neutral on its face. When you just look at it, it appears facially neutral, but it disproportionately and negatively affects a protected group of people. An example would be requiring a college degree for a job that doesn't really need someone to have a college degree, because that potentially impacts marginalized people or groups who traditionally not have access to higher education, like those from lower socioeconomic status, Black and Brown people. And so it's really important that when you're looking at these, what appear to be neutral rules, that you also look at the impact that they're having on the people they affect. So moving forward, employers really should take care to ensure that these practices don't unintentionally incorporate protected characteristics as factors for preferential treatment. So an example would be hiring quotas. There has been a push in recent years for corporate boards to be diversified, for example, and to say we want to have this percentage of women as directors, we want to have this percentage of people of color. And so having a quota that you must reach within a certain period of time may be considered problematic under the current administration. So shifting gears. Again, I'm really nervous to talk about scripture. My brother is in. But I want to talk a little bit about biblical principles about the modern concept of diversity, equity, inclusion. Obviously, there was no word in English, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the time that the Bible was written, at the time that Acts being described in the Bible happened. But there are a number of scriptures that impact how we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion today as people of faith, and especially as Methodists. So although the United Methodist Church does not mandate a specific version of the Bible, the ones I'm going to talk to you about today, I took from the New Revised Standard Version, which I know is one of the ones that this church uses. So the reason I put these up like this, I'm going to read them to you. I don't expect you to have them memorized. I certainly don't have them memorized, but I wanted you to see that these concepts run throughout the entire Bible, from the very first book to the last. And also, it's in the prophets, it's in the Gospels, it's in Paul's letter to the Galatians. And so this is covering church history from start to finish, right? So in Genesis, this verse says, so God created humans in his image, in the image of God, he created them. So this refers to the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. I don't know if any of you have ever watched the show Finding Your Roots on PBS with Dr. Henry Louis Gates. Essentially, he has people come on, largely celebrities, where they do DNA testing and find out a lot about their families. And that's particularly helpful for people who are descended from the African diaspora, whose ancestors came through chattel slavery to the United States, because their history stops when people left Africa. They don't all often know much about their families. And so I was watching an interview with him the other day, and he said, what I want people to understand from me doing this work is that phenotypically, we may appear different. We may have different skin colors, we might have limb differences, we might be neurodivergent and think differently, but on the inside, we're 99.99% the same. That doesn't mean we should not recognize the different lived experiences that people have, but it's important to remember how much we have in common as well. So Micah, this verse is, he has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So doing justice and loving kindness means we have to treat everyone equitably and equally. Matthew, love your neighbor as yourself. In this verse, the very first part of it is, you must love God with all your heart and all your mind, everything you have. But second only to that is to love your neighbor as yourself. So that should tell you how important God thinks this work is that we love our neighbors just as much as we love ourselves, and close to how much we love God. And in John, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. And in Galatians, Paul writes, there is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And finally, in Revelations, this one is, after this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. So the vision of heaven that we get in Revelations is one that contains a diverse multitude that is inclusive of everyone. So Jesus welcomed everyone to the table. And I got this from a person I follow on social media. His name is Reverend Dr. Chuck Curry, and he follows this up by saying that Jesus is God's director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I really like to say. And what might he mean by this, right? So Jesus' words and acts demonstrate his embrace of these concepts of DEI that we're talking about. He connected with people of all backgrounds. He lifted up the excluded, widows, Samaritans, lepers, people who were suffering from terminal diseases. He ministered to the marginalized. He wasn't hanging out with the hoi polloi, he was hanging out with the common people. And he loved them. It wasn't just that he was hanging out with them, he loved them and provided care for them. He touched the untouchable, and he challenged the systemic barriers of his day by the way he was behaving. And that's actually why he was killed, because he did that. So I want to talk a little bit about United Methodism and DEI. And also, if you have questions, it's perfectly okay if you want to raise your hand and ask me. Again, I'm no Bible expert, but if we want to talk about DEI, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. You don't have to wait till the end. So I went and spent a lot of time with the social principles that were passed at a general conference in Charlotte in 2024. And I wanted to highlight some of them to think so that you can think about what do these social principles really mean when we're thinking about DEI. And the first one is that you are encouraged as Methodists, or we are encouraged as Methodists, to be in active ministry with impoverished communities and to support equal opportunities. I'm going to pick a teeny tiny bone with the conference for the language that they had in that principle, because they talked about the people in impoverished communities and their efforts to get equal opportunities. That language is very othering because it's not our problem, it's their problem. And we're swooping in from above to save them from whatever they're dealing with. And so I don't think that was intentional, but I think a lot of privileged people, most of us in this room, I think would be considered privileged, think about it as we're up here and everybody else is down there. And so I would just pick one teeny tiny bone with the conference on that language. Marriage is described as between two adult persons. Used to say man and a woman. Now it says two adult persons. And the social principles also recognize that families come in all shapes and sizes, that there's no one right way to be a family. I appreciate this because I'm divorced and remarried. And I was really very upset about getting divorced. And I went to go see my Methodist pastor at my church in Dallas. I used to live in Dallas, Texas. And one of the things I said to her was, I made these vows before God, and I'm really worried about ending them. When I said them, I meant until the day that I die. And she said, okay, but you can't do it for both of you. So if the vows are being broken by another person, what are you expecting? And so that was a really huge gift that she gave me that helped me realize it was probably time for me to move along. Supporting the rights of all people to make decisions about their own bodies. Doesn't really go into too much detail about what this means, but I'll tell you what I think about that. It means if you are a person that feels your gender identity does not fit what you look like on the outside, then it's okay for you to make that transformation in your body. That's your choice. Although that they don't specifically say that abortion is acceptable, they do say we cannot condone it, but we understand that in certain circumstances, that might be the best option for the mom or for the child. And they also encourage adoption as an option. One thing I would say about adoption, I know lots of people who've been adopted into loving families and had a wonderful experience being raised by not biological parents. However, making someone have a baby and give them up for adoption is still forcing them to be pregnant. It absolves them from parenthood. It's not the same. And so just think about that a little bit differently. And also they emphasize the importance of equitable access to reproductive health, that it's really important for everyone to be able to seek that kind of health care. And this one, the first one, is a tough one. So they also mention the need to fight back against colonialism and neocolonialism. And so as I was saying earlier when we started this morning, that the role of the church in causing harm in the world, one of the ways that the church did that was to support colonialism around the world, particularly in what Europeans considered underdeveloped continents and nations, right? I'm putting that in air quotes for a reason. And so part of the reason that the schism has happened recently in the United Methodist Church and people who disaffiliated was because many in the African church were so opposed to LGBTQ plus people having equal rights in the church. So I had a very interesting conversation with my mom, also a Methodist, very committed. She was sort of saying, I'm just so frustrated with these African churches and that they won't see. And I said, Mom, back up for a second. The African churches have those beliefs because they were shoved down their throats by white Christian missionaries, right? And so it isn't that was not their belief, that was not their faith tradition, it was not their social practice, it was colonialists who came and made them believe that it was wrong. So it's really important for us to understand the cause and effect when it comes comes to those things. So the social principles also reference gender equality and gender diversity. They specifically reference sexual orientation and gender identity, and say that those people are welcome in the family of faith and as part of the Methodist Church. Now, you all know, I'm sure, because you did not disaffiliate, that LGBTQ plus individuals can be pastors in the Methodist Church. They can perform marriages. They can marry people who are LGBTQ plus. I'm really happy that that's the case. I belonged to a Reconciling Ministries Network church when I lived in Dallas. And part of the reason I started going there was because they had taken such a strong stand. And also, it was a very racially and ethnically diverse church. I think, you've all heard, I'm sure, that 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in the United States. Just looking around this room, it appears mostly white folks. Thank you, my friend Lake, for coming. And I want to make sure that we understand that just because it has always been that way doesn't mean it needs to stay that way. So reach out to some of your brothers and sisters or nibblings if they don't have a gender or are trans or non-binary, and invite them to be part of this community. And that doesn't mean just inviting them and saying, well, good luck. It means that you welcome them and treat them with inclusion and belonging, the way that we talked about at the beginning of this talk. The social principles also strongly condemn racism, ethnocentrism, and tribalism. And they define that as saying no one group of individuals is superior to any other. Also, this is the word political makes me a little nervous at church, but we're going to talk about it, that love, agape love, the love that we have for each other as members of this faith community, requires responsible political action aimed at the betterment of society and promotion of the common good. And they describe that as that we all must work for the civil and human rights of every single person, even if they're not Methodist, even if they don't look like us, even if they believe something completely different, even if they're non-believers. We have to fight for their civil and human rights. That's our job as part of agape love in this community. Any questions about that? Or anything about the social principles anyone wants to share? Okay, so this quote is from the UMC's position statement on eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is from May of 2025. The bishops prepared this after the executive orders were released in January. And they say the General Board of Church and Society supports diversity, equity, and inclusion policies as acts of restorative justice, seeking to honor and advance all persons and to eliminate exclusion and discrimination. And their use of the words diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important here, because those are words a lot of organizations have backed away from. They're not saying those words anymore. They're saying different titles for people. They're asking that you don't use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you pick other words. And that can be really problematic if we're not talking about the real thing, right? It's hard enough for people to understand DEI as a concept when we don't hide it. So one of the things that Debbie and Kent asked me to address when I met with you today is actions that we can take as United Methodists and also just as citizens to meet what the social principles ask of us. And so I'm not going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what the General Board of Church and Society thinks, because that's more important to know what your church is saying. So they recommend that you affirm and participate in the UMC's ongoing work in support of equity. They want us to encourage fellow United Methodists to advocate for the rights of all marginalized communities. They want us to pray that the current administration will stop its discriminatory practices. And they also want us to read more about diversity and justice in the Book of Resolutions. And they specifically list number 3325, which is a charter for racial justice, and in an independent global community, and number 3326, which is about affirmative action. So I'm going to tell you now what I think to interpret these things from the church. So one of the things that we need to do is to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sometimes talking about these issues makes people really queasy, right? Mostly because they don't want to say or do the wrong thing, right? Most of us are well-intentioned and want to do the right thing and say the right thing and be inclusive and welcoming. But it can be problematic when we don't. And I will tell you, so let me tell you a story about myself. So I went to a conference called the Social Justice Training Institute back in 2014. At that time, I was working in higher education. It's focused on people who work in higher ed administration. It's a small conference. It's about 50 to 55 people. They run it twice a year, and they do a race immersion as part of this program. And one of the things that happens is that you segregate yourselves by caucus. So the white folks go talk, the black folks go talk, the multiracial people go talk. And it's really so that the white people can process their emotions, really everybody can process their emotions, but that the privileged people are not causing further harm to the marginalized folks by processing in front of them, okay? And so I was really uncomfortable with that at first. I thought, this is really awkward. I don't really like being segregated by race, because my whole life I've been taught that we shouldn't be doing that. But it was an important part of my journey in understanding that my experience around this is not everyone else's experience. So one of the things I learned at that conference is that every single person has the obligation, especially privileged people, to speak up when you see or hear discrimination or harm being perpetrated against a marginalized person or community. And that can be really hard if you've never done it. It can be scary. You can be placing yourself sometimes in harm's way. So I'll give you an example of a time that I did this. So when I lived in Dallas, I went to the post office a lot. My mom worked for the Postal Service her entire career. She started as a graduate intern in college, and she left as the vice president of marketing. So she spent her entire career working her way up. So I felt like the Postal Service paid for my way through life. I should continue to support the Postal Service by sending mail. So I got to know the ladies in my post office really well. There were 3 Black women that worked there. And one day I was waiting in line, and there were probably maybe 10 people in line. And there was a white man, youngish, I would say late 20s, early 30s, who was berating one of the clerks, just real, like spitting mad. And she was remaining calm. She was saying, "Sir, I understand you're upset, but the person who needs to help you with that is out sick today." And unfortunately, it had to do with getting a key to a post office box, which is not that big of a deal, right? He was hopping mad, and he started attacking her personally. And I kept looking around because there were, men in the space, and I thought, I'm a little afraid to take this guy on. He's really angry, but not one. Everybody was looking down. So I walked up next to him, and I turned to him and I said, "That's enough." And he said, "Well, I said, I told you that's enough. She has politely told you she cannot help you, and you need to leave now." And he said, and he was talking about how important he is. And I said, "Well, you don't look like Barack Obama to me," because Barack was the president at the time. I call him Barack because I consider us personal friends. Michelle too. But he kind of looked at me, and I'll be honest, I was afraid to leave the post office that day because I thought he would be out there waiting for me, because he was really out of control. But my friend, the clerk at the post office, was going to start to cry. And I really did not want her to be in that situation without someone helping her. So after he left, people in the line were clapping and applauding and saying, "Great job." And I turned around and said, "Well, where were all of you? You could have stood up and said something." Next, right? I mean, it was really frustrating, but that's our job, right? When you see someone being harmed like that, you have an obligation to step in and try to protect them from what's happening. And after that, oh my gosh, it was a party every time I went to the post office after that. I really loved those ladies, and I was very sad when I left. I meant to go say goodbye to them before I moved to Greensboro. The other thing is be accountable when you cause harm, right? It's really important to be accountable and to own your mistakes and your errors, and to apologize without explanation or defensiveness, because it's often like, "Well, I didn't intend." We're going to talk about that in the next slide just a little bit. But first, I'm going to give you a challenge. And you don't have to answer this out loud. I just want you to think about it. So based on what we've just been talking about with the social principles, what's required of us as United Methodists and people who love God, how many of us have done something about the people who are starving in Gaza right now? Or the war in Sudan? Or the war in Ukraine? or the illegal and unconstitutional things that are happening to immigrants in all of our communities. If you haven't, this is not to shame you or to make you feel badly at all. It's to make you think about, should we be doing that? It's really important that we're thinking about those folks who need us to stand up for them right now and to amplify their voices, not to put our voices in their place, but to amplify what they say that they need. Everything okay, Al? Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So I just challenge you to think about that when you go home today.
Try it now.
Okay, there we go. All right. So I also want to talk to you a little bit about potential pitfalls in doing this work and the ways that you can sort of stop yourself before maybe you do some things that might unintentionally cause harm. So I got some of this idea to talk about this from the Council of Bishops letter of May 7th, which was the stand against dismantling DEI. And one of the things that the bishops wrote was that learning the truth of a nation's history is not only a moral imperative, it is necessary to avoid repeating the mistakes of an immoral past. When we educate ourselves on a nation's history regarding race, indigenous tribes, gender, and disability, we yearn for and feel compelled to create a country where all people are treated justly and where we live in harmony with one another. So let me share a little bit more what I mean by that. I've often heard people say, why are you still talking about slavery? That was 150 years ago. Well, I want you to imagine a timeline. Okay, imagine the timeline that starts at 1619, which is when the first enslaved people were brought to these shores from Africa in chains. From 1619 until the passage of the Equal Rights Amendments in 1865, so how long was that? 250 years-ish. Chattel slavery was operating not only here in the United States, but in other nations. Okay, millions of Africans were enslaved and brought here to build the United States of America. In comparison, slavery here has only been done for about 150 years, right? So it's 250, sorry, my math was terrible. That's why I became a lawyer, not a doctor, because I can't do math in my head. But the length of time that folks were enslaved here is much longer than it's been since slavery ended. And also, slavery didn't just end and that was it, right? There was Reconstruction, was a failed experiment. We had Jim Crow laws and all of the horrible things that were done to people of color in those years following. And so when people say it's over, get over it, there is no getting over it, because the catch up that has to happen requires us to make reparations for what was done to them. And I'm going to quote my sweet mom again. And you're there, clever. She said to me once, you know, Jennifer, I really think that part of the reason our country struggles is because we never made amends or atone for what we did with chattel slavery. And I think she's right. I think that we never really faced the horror of what happened as part of that. And because of that, we are still having these difficult conversations and still facing a lot of inequity. So just something to think about. And if you hear somebody say, oh my gosh, slavery was so long ago, why are we still talking about it? Now you know what to say in response to that, or at least one thing to say. So these are some mistakes that I've seen privileged people make, and I have made them. Okay, so I'm going to own up and tell you I have colossally messed up multiple times. And it's hard because I hate to be wrong. And in fact, my lawyer training made this harder for me, because when I was trained to be a lawyer, I was trained to win at all costs. It wasn't about listening to understand or listening to know someone. It was about listening for the chinks in the argument so that I could go in there and win. And so I've had to work really, really hard not to try to win, especially in this space, because winning is when we all feel that we're being heard and accepted, right? It's not about me being right. So something that often happens is we center our own lived experiences, right? So someone shares, you know, it's been really hard for me as a Black woman to advance in my company. And you say, oh my gosh, I totally get it, I'm a woman too. Well, no, I don't, because I have not lived in this world as a Black woman. I've lived in the world as a woman. And so my experience, my lived experience is not the same. And so our job in that space is to listen and say, tell me more about that. What do you wish people had done to help you in that situation? How can I help you? What support do you need right now? And then listen to what they tell you and try to do it if it's possible for you, because follow through is also important. The other thing that a lot of folks do is performative actions. And that means, I call it the good white people trope, right? Or the good straight people or the good able bodied people. Because we want to look like we're doing good and making the right choices, but we aren't necessarily living that truth, right? So, one example I would say is I am, there's someone in my family, I won't say who it is, who calls themselves a Christian, but they are extremely committed to this administration's actions around immigration and DEI. And so when they post scripture and verses and things to show what a good Christian they are, that's performative to me, right? Because you're not really living that truth. You're just trying to get people to think that you do, that you're a good person. And so don't be performative. If you're going to say something, it's like I know I have friends that say, if you're going to talk about it, be about it, right? Means you got to do it. Also, a lot of people, and I know we talk about race a lot in DEI because it's a visible difference that's easy to focus on, but it's just one part of considering this. Difference is not just about race. So I'm going to use this example about I don't see color, but I don't want you to think that I'm focusing only on race as we talk about DEI. So I was raised not to see color. A lot of well-intentioned white parents said, don't see color. You know, and I forget what the old kids song was about yellow, red, black, and white. We are all loved in Jesus' sight. In his sight, yeah. So I learned that in Sunday school. And unfortunately, that is harmful. And I didn't know that until I was in my 40s. So after I stopped my law practice, I went back to school at Southern Methodist University, and I got a master's focused in human rights and social justice. And one of the things I did was go work in the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs, supporting undergrads from marginalized communities. I was the only white person in the office. I was the oldest person in the office. I was in my 40s. And my supervisor was a Black man. His name's Preston Lynch. He works at George Mason now. And one day, he said, do you feel sorry for me because I'm Black? And I thought, do I feel sorry for him because he's Black? So I said, I'm going to go home and think about that for a minute. I don't want to respond right now, so I want to give a thoughtful answer. And this goes back to what I said earlier about how privileged people tend to see themselves up here and that we're reaching down to pull people up, when in fact, we all should be on the equal plane. So I went back the next day and I said, Preston, I think maybe I did feel sorry for you because you're Black. And he said, let me guess, your parents taught you not to see color. I said, yeah. And he said, well, listen, when you don't see my color, you are not seeing the full breadth of my lived experience. You are assuming that mine was like yours. And he said, I'm here to tell you it's not. And he had been kind of, frosty is too strong a word when I first started working there. He was nice to me, but he was a little distant. Yeah, reserved. And so that day he said, I want you to understand something, Jennifer. You look like a lot of people who have hurt me in my life. And that was hard to hear because we want to be seen as individuals, right? But I'm the good one. I wouldn't do that. But I was doing that unintentionally, but I wasn't aware. And so seeing color is critically important. And that means you don't think less of somebody because it's their color. It means you try to understand that their lived experience is not the same as yours. And sometimes, people might not want to talk to you about it. It takes building trust in those relationships to be able to talk about it, to say, I want to know more about what your lived experience has been. And that works with people who are LGBTQ when you're straight, or trans when you're cis, or any of those things. So or an immigrant and a citizen, those kinds of things. Well, those are not unique, but someone who isn't yet a citizen who immigrated and you who might have been born here. Okay. The other is white saviorism, white fragility, and white tears. This is a tough one. This one was really hard for me, but white saviorism is when we swoop in to try to help people, and it applies in all contexts, it's not just about race, but swoop in to fix what's wrong for people in communities without asking them what they need first. White fragility is that many privileged people have an extremely difficult time sitting with the discomfort of the harm that they've caused, right? Because we've never had to. There's a book by a woman named Robin DiAngelo. She's a white woman that does DEI work. Some of what she says is, I consider, a little problematic, but she does talk about white fragility as we don't have the skills to sit down and have these tough conversations. And so we tend to break down in emotion, and that's where white tears come from. So often tears have been weaponized by white supremacy. The natural response of tears, of feeling sad that you harm someone, have been weaponized by the system of white supremacy, so that if someone of color or someone sees you crying because you caused harm, you're centering yourself and your own emotions, not the harm that you caused. So if you feel like you're going to cry, I've had to do this several times because I'm a crier, say, I need to go gather myself and I'll be right back to continue this conversation. Please excuse me. Leave, and I come back when I'm ready to talk without crying. Because I want to make sure I'm centering the harm and the person who is harmed and not myself in that space. You can process how badly you're feeling with somebody else who isn't there, who wasn't harmed. And finally, intent does not supersede impact. A lot of times when someone says, that hurt me, you say, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. It doesn't matter. The harm's already done. So think about it like this. Let's say we're playing catch, okay? And I drill you in the face with the ball. I miss your glove completely and I drill you in the face with the ball. And you say, oh, you hit me in the face. That really hurt. And I'm like, well, I didn't mean to. Would you feel that I was caring about you? Of course not. What would I do? Oh my gosh, I'm terribly sorry. Let me get you some ice. What do you need? Do you need to go to the emergency room? I wouldn't just say, well, I didn't mean to, so it's no big deal. So it's the same when we cause harm in this space as well. And I'm not going to throw a baseball at you, so don't worry. That's it. What questions do you have? Yes, sir.
First thing I want to congratulate you. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you.
This section hit me so good because I'm Black. Anybody see me? I'm Black. And I've been Black 92 years.
Yes, sir.
And it bothers me. And since I've been in church, for people come out and they're being kind and they're being nice, that, you know, William, I don't see color. You know, and I'm saying, who do you see? I'm not white, I'm not green. And you know, so I've seen these things. And then when it comes back, you talked about why we still talk about, don't want to talk about slavery. But you know, I lived through Jim Crow. And that's only been, you know, when I came to college in 1956, I sat in the back row of a bus. When I went home, and when I came in 52, when I came home in 1956, I sat in the back. When I went to Yale in 1960, I sat in the back of the bus. So it hasn't been that long. It hasn't been that long. And I came to this church by mistake. I was looking for a Black church, really. And I came in here, and it was on the Palm Sunday. And if I was in, I couldn't turn around and go back. So I sat down, and there were some Black people here. There was 2 or 3. And when they looked at me, but I was welcome. I was really welcome. So I wanted to see if it's real. So I came back the next time and said, oh, it's a great church. I try to make sure people see my face. But you know, women accept me, but men, white men, they don't accept me. You know, I've been here and they got a white group to play golf. No man has ever come and say, hey, Jeff, wait, how about playing golf? How about Johnny and our men, all men golf today? It seems like they have a fear to interact with me. But they're great to me, but they don't interact. And that don't mean all of them, because I deliver meals on wheels for them. I'm just saying about a lot of them. And I often wonder why. And you know, I had a conversation, my son is a doctor in Henderson, North Carolina for 18 years. And under his 18 years, he started got to me. I said, why? He said, because I'm cheap. when I see white women, their husbands come down and tell me I don't want you to touch my wife.
Wow.
So he left and went to the University of Illinois. That's where he is now. Because he said it's reality, and he think that's the doctor.
I have no doubt.
But
That he
the
is.
point of what he said, they come to him not in the front of their wives, but they tell him, I don't want you to touch my wife anymore. Just tell her you can't see. And that hurt him because he's a doctor. And he looks at everybody that they're human. That's his job to do.
Yes,
He
sir.
took an oath. So, you know, the point that people just can't get over. And I have never understood as a little boy and up to this day, why is it that they hate color? They just cannot accept color. And I look back when Obama was president. I looked at how they treated him. They said he was great. But I think of the time that you remember up in Martha Vineyard or something like that. And he was forced to meet with a policeman and apologize. There's no, you think Trump would do that? You think that he was forced to do it? People criticized him so much because he said that the police treated his friends, the guy who was the genealogist. Yeah. So, you know, can you imagine that? And he's the president, he's forced to sit with a person. I think it was great and proud of that, but I knew he was forced to.
Yeah. I think, well, it would take us a really long time to talk about why color is still such an issue.
Yeah.
But I'll just say that when we think about the founding of the United States, right? Originally, both Black and white people were indentured servants, right? And the goal was to be able to come and work and buy your freedom, essentially, right? And then when people who had a lot of money and power decided they wanted to make more money and get more power, they said, well, we know how to separate, because you can tell the difference just by looking at people based on their skin color. And so they created the system of white supremacy. And that the echoes of that are still here in the things that you shared about what happened to your son, about what happened to you. And thank you for sharing that about yourself and about your son, because that's painful to talk about. And, you know, you mentioned white men not being inviting to you. I would guess, I don't know them, so I can't say, but I would just guess that it may be that they don't want to do something that's going to harm you. And so they exclude you because they don't want to mess up.
And you know, another thing I don't hear anybody talk about is they don't talk about whites who are indentured slaves. Mm-hmm. You know, I heard them in the genealogy. I can't ever heard a white person come say, "Oh, my parents was indentured slaves."
Because you could assimilate. That's the other thing about, I want to talk about this with immigration. I think you've had an immigration talk already, right? Is that okay? So something really important to remember about immigration is that white European immigrants, within one generation, they could assimilate because their accents went away when their children were being raised here. And also most of them look white. So they were immigrants, but they could assimilate much more easily than someone who came from Latin America, South America, Africa, Asia, right? Because they phenotypically look different. And so that's a problem. That's that legacy of white supremacy. And maybe someday you can invite me back, we can talk about that some more. But I'm getting the high sign over here, so I'm about to get yanked off with the cane. Are there any other quick questions I can answer? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make a comment about affirmative action.
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess it hit me when our present administration started saying he's supposed to take all affirmative action. Like, my son lives in DC, and the thing I love, I mean, there are a lot of, I'm not saying DC proper is all good. It has its problems. But the one thing I love about it is my grandchildren go to public school. And their classes, their schools are so diverse. And I am amazed every time I go up there and they have a birthday party or they have a school function. And I look, bring of their friends. And I just think how lucky they are and hopeful for that generation. they will come up with a little more understanding. But I asked my son about affirmative action. I said, how do you feel about affirmative action? You're a big businessman. He said, well, I'll put it this way. I went to NC State. If I had gone to school with all middle class white male, I could have never achieved what I've achieved. I have 20 languages and 20 cultures in my department alone. And he said, if I can't reach and focus on what they can achieve, not what where they're from, culture. He said, I could have never learned that if I had not gone to Pittsburgh University. He said, there may be problems with it. But he said, I couldn't make it in the world without going through a diverse university.
Yeah, let me just say one thing about affirmative action, which is often people say, well, you've heard the words diversity hire. They got the job because of their marginalized identity. What makes us think that person wasn't the most qualified person for the job?
But that just really struck a note to me. Who has struggled with affirmative action, I'll be honest.
I'm giving you the real high five.
Yeah, she's firing me.
Yeah, okay, I know some of you have some more questions,
You can come up.
but I want, okay, well, I'll do it.
Okay.
I know some of you have some more questions and Jen will stay to answer those questions, but we also have people who need to get to church and I want to tell them it's okay to get up and go to church, but let's thank Jen. And also Charlene for the great introduction. Charlene, that was great. Next week is our last session. It also is going to be a great session. It's going to deal with economic mobility. And North Carolina is a state that does not rank well at all in economic mobility. It is a very difficult place to get ahead if you are marginalized. So we have Craig Richardson coming. He's an expert on this. He's a faculty member at Winston-Salem State. And he's going to tell us some very practical things we can do to help people in this regard. So join us next week. And now I'm going to give things back to Jen to answer some questions. So come back on up.
Yeah, if you want to go to church service, please feel free to go. Yes, sir.
I only missed out something you said earlier, that, this is what Jesus said. I missed it.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you say that again?
But you said this is what.
I missed out that this is what Jesus.
Oh, what killed?
What was the preceding statement?
Okay, the question was why Jesus was killed. It was because he was operating outside the system and trying to make change that the folks that were in charge did not like. And so that's why.
And of course, this video.
Yeah, yes, and good point, okay, because he had to be for us to be saved. Yeah.
That was the thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I have
You're welcome.
3 of my grandchildren. So I feel that I live this and have been since the first piece point. Because I want everything, that they can experience to be as positive. And of course, mothers have to talk about
Yeah.
what to do, stop, or whatever. And thankfully, you're well adjusted and all your readers, 17-year-old. But lots of friends, and that's the thing, that those friends are hot. Because in school and everything else, they just have a lot of white friends, but they are accepted and they're loved. And I just, as you did in the post office, to let somebody come up to one in a hurtful manner and I would be stopped.
And I will, it's wonderful. And I will also encourage you to do that for people who aren't your grandchildren too.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So glad to hear that. Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned the talk. Does everybody in here know what the talk is? Yes. Yeah. That's right. I have two stepsons, one of whom just started driving recently. And I realized I didn't have to have to talk with him. I did say, some of your friends are not having the same experience as you with driving, so let's talk about that. He always says, oh, Jen, here we go again. I'm hoping it's sinking in as we move forward. Yes. Any other questions? Debbie and Kent have my contact information, so if you would like to reach out to me separately, feel free anytime.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
You mentioned George Mason, were you ever put in?
My dad went there.
Oh, really?
He graduated from there. He started at the University of South Carolina, but then he was an idiot and volunteered for Vietnam. And so he went to Vietnam.
And then you around the corner from George Mason.
Yes, he went there. But my old boss Preston works there now.
Okay.
Yes.
They've given the president a pretty hard time.
Yes. I actually just texted my friend that works there to say, are you okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope this will be 42nd.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate
Oh,
that.
Shirley.
Yes, I would love to read it.
Are you Shirley?
I have the
I'm sorry, I missed about the presentation.
Thank you for your technical assistance.
We lost the image of you.
Oh, that's okay.
I look at it.
They knew what I looked like by then.